Welcome to Collective Conversations. I am your host, Mike Brewer, and today we have the honor and the privilege of having Dom Beverage back to discuss the latest edition of 20 for 20. This has become a tradition for us to be a part of the 2020 release, 20 for 20 release. Dom, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. And great to be appearing. I think for the first time on the Multifamily Media Network.
That's right. I appreciate the mention. It's This is the first edition of the Multifamily Media Network. Yeah, we're very excited about that. Thanks for the mention, and more to come as it relates to that. So, Dom, I was trying to think of something pithy to say to begin with. Grab your favorite beverage is one of my taglines, and get ready for some Dom Beverage and 20 for 20. But there's my best effort. I Dom, I want to start by saying that this is one of my favorite reports, and I mean that from my heart of hearts. And the reason why is because I know you invest a lot of time and energy into researching and reaching out to 20 different multifamily people and individuals. Not to mention, I know you draw from a lot of other sources to put this thing together, and I know it's a tremendous effort. So thank you for the time and effort that you put into it to start.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean it's a lot of work, but it's my favorite thing that I do every year. I mean the conversations. This last couple of weeks I've been going through the pre-briefings of all the people who took part, and I just love the conversations. Every conversation just teaches you like stuff that you've been thinking about the wrong way, or just teaches you something different about something you thought you understood. I just see it as there's basically a couple of months of each year where I kind of go back to school, and I feel the better for it once it's done.
I very much enjoy that. I think for potentially for people who are not aware of 20 for 20 or have not read the report in the past, maybe we start out by just creating a little bit of context for those. For those who have read it, this will just be a revisit of sort of the origin of 20 for 20 and the research rationale behind it.
Yeah, well, so 20 for 20, this is the sixth edition. So we've been doing this since 2018. Funniest thing is, you remember you were the first ever interviewee that we ever spoke to for the first ever edition of 20 for 20, like all the way back at Optech in 2018. I think it was in Orlando. We sat down and spoke. But yeah, it started as this thing where Donald Davidoff and I just decided to just interview a bunch of people, just talk about something different during Optech week, right? Just instead of pitching stuff to them, just get them to tell you stuff about what they're thinking about, and maybe we could put a paper together with what the findings are. And once we sort of got into it, we thought, actually, this is kind of interesting, this stuff that we're learning. And then when we published the first version of the paper, it got a way bigger response than we expected it to, and so we just decided this is going to be an annual thing. And so yeah, we're six years on. We interview 20 people. I interview 20 people at the end of every year. The questions change a bit every year. Like there's a separate group of people that I'll do briefings with, in the month before I run the actual interviews, and that's usually with a different set of people who have different perspectives. Some technology leaders, some VCs, some people who own functions like marketing or asset management in the companies that they work for. Again, because what you're trying to do is make sure that the 30 minutes worth of questions that you're going to go through in the interviews are touching on the stuff that's closest to top of mind. There's always surprises that come out of the interview, but you really want to orientate the interviews towards stuff that you know is important. And yeah, then you've got a very tight 30-minute survey that you go through in these 30-minute conversations. It feels laborious, but you can't really understand what's going on in technology unless you get to ask people questions about it. Like, because the why behind why this kind of company is doing it this way and that kind of company is doing it the other way. That's where most of the insight is in the paper, and you just can't get to that with a regular survey. You have to approach that as a conversation. But the conversations are structured enough. They're very, there's lots and lots of material you have to get through. Everyone answers exactly the same set of questions, and then it gets synthesized into this book that we publish each year.
And this has nothing to do with anything, but I'm just curious. Do you know off the top of your head, this year's report is 51 pages long. I wonder if, like prior years' reports, the report this year longer than ever, or is it roughly the same size every year?
So I think it's been about the same length the last couple of years. I think it sort of got longer because I mean, the fact that it's a 30-minute interview means that there ought to be a plateau that you reach that you're not going to get past because it is the same.
Mhm.
So I think over the years, like you get better at not asking questions that don't lead you to interesting findings. But yeah, once it's all killer no filler, like it's the amount of content that comes out of it is roughly the same. So it should usually be the same length now, I think.
Well, thank you for entertaining that question. Okay, so digging in, you did a 23 recap and a 24, let's call it a forward look, just for compare and contrast. What were the highlights in your mind from 2023? Let's start there.
Well, so I think one of the things that really jumped out looking back at 2023 was something I wasn't expecting at all, which was I hadn't appreciated how big and how pervasive an issue fraud is at the moment. In fact, that rose to the level of being one of the major findings of the paper was that there's always, I mean, you've run apartments in Atlanta for years. Like the story is always if there are a few markets where fraud is particularly prevalent. But what seems different this year is that it seems like a nationwide or a mostly nationwide problem. There are some you've got this kind of confluence of backlog courts where it's taking a really long time to evict people, right? So the cost associated with every fraudulent application is now much greater. It's gone from a 60-day to like a 9-month problem, right?
Right.
So that's a really serious consequence. At the same time, you've got more technology on the bad guys side that's being thrown at this. So it's very easy to buy whatever fake documents you want. It's you can tell that people are being quite systematic about how they target properties. So you'll get people who are filing, who are attempting to apply to figure out what checks there are in the application process. So people are being pushed towards the properties that are the least well equipped to deal with to spot fraud. And it generally just sort of feels like this pandemic hangover, right? It's like you had eviction moratoria that created this kind of market. So you have kind of influencers, you have social media accounts that tell people how to do that, and from there it's a pretty short step into telling people how to file fraudulent applications, right? So you've got, I mean, some of them are scary, right? You've got people who target specific companies. This is how you put a fake application into company X, right? And you've got TikToks that are getting thousands of views. So with content like that, so it's now it just feels like this arms race that we have where there's technology on the bad guys side. You need technology to stop this on the good guys side, and I didn't expect that people were burning as many calories on this as they clearly are at the moment. It's also, I mean, I was sort of aware, or I've subsequently become aware of just how much new technology there is here as well. Like I think it was the most evaluated technology amongst the people that we spoke to. But yeah, that was a whole thing that I did not expect I was going to encounter at all.
Got it. Yeah, you're right. I operated here in Atlanta, and I think Atlanta actually, statistically speaking, leads the league in fraud. And there's some interesting stories, not to get off on a tangent, but I know fraud was even being facilitated from the inside, meaning if you had a job posting out there, people would actually apply for your job, they would get hired, and they would come and facilitate fraud from inside of your company. So it's pretty pervasive.
Wow.
I don't know what tech catches that necessarily, but I'm sure there's somebody working on something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Gosh.
so 20, I think in 23 that was a big issue in 23. It's obviously presented in terms of continuing to be an issue, and certainly technologies to put against it in 24. Was there anything else in 2023 as a look back that, if you're comparing to 24, that was a highlight for you before we dig into 24?
Not off the top of my head. I have to look through my copy here. Uh,
I love it. I
but,
love it.
not really off the top of my head.
Okay, so I'm looking at the table of contents, and I know that centralization has been a big deal. Tech stacks have been a big deal. There are lots of predicates for this, and maybe we can unpack some of those. But let's start with centralization. You, I think, were the first person, at least for me, that sort of segmented this into three buckets, and one being leasing, one being admin, one being maintenance, which I think was fantastic. It's a very good way to look at that. So, what do you think from the 24 interviews are the highlights as it relates to centralization?
But so the main story is consistent with what we found last year. So it was surprising last year. I've been asking people about this for about 3 years now. And each year we get deeper and deeper into the details of what people are doing, what they're planning to do. And last year, the thing that was I did not expect to find out was that although all of the talk in the industry is about leasing, right? It's the sort of sexy thing. It's the thing that it has the highest sort of profile. You would think that the thing that people were moving the most aggressively to centralize was their leasing function, and what we found was it wasn't. Like that's not where most of the actual work was going on. It was really admin. The role the work that we associate with the assistant property manager role. That was the area that was being centralized the most aggressively. That's continued year over year, and it feels, we talked to people this time about we invited people to speculate on what they think the end state is going to be for leasing for admin and for maintenance, and between that view and the actual tangible progress that people made, it feels like those three areas are shaking out quite differently. Like I feel that admin is moving quickly enough that I think in a relatively small number of years it will seem unusual to do, property accounting and collections and payment processing and deposits and all of that administrative stuff. I think it will be odd to do that at property level anymore. Like it's moving fast enough now. I think more than half of the people that I spoke to were in the process of taking those roles offsite. And I don't think the same is entirely true of leasing, and I definitely don't think the same is true of maintenance, right? So leasing, you've got you've got the sort of the vision that UDR talks about at one end, where it's almost entirely self-serve. I say almost entirely because it's not 100% self-serve. You still need, UDR say publicly that they do lease ups, right? With they use people, they use a conventional model for lease ups, right? So we know you need some capacity to tour people if people want to be toured, even if you're predominantly self-serve. But I think the UDR model is the furthest to the automation, centralization end of the scale. And then at the other end, you've got people who've decided this is not for them. They're not going to do it. I know it feels to me like everybody's going to occupy some position on that continuum between those ends. and it's basically because leasing leasing is not without physical constraints. Like you do need some capacity, as I said, to tour people. And if you're in a position where you don't have properties that are close together, that's going to tend to mean that you don't get to change much about the way that you staff properties. Admin, on the other hand, there's absolutely no reason why any of that work has to take place at property. In fact, the main reason why people, I think, don't move it more quickly has nothing to do with the work. It's purely to do with, we currently have 3 people. If we went from 3 people to 2 people, that creates coverage problems that we have to figure out. So I think the reason for not removing that role altogether is primarily an operational concern that has nothing to do with the actual work that person does. So, there's slightly different in that regard. So admin, you're unconstrained in what you can take off property. Leasing, you're a bit constrained in what you can take off property because you still need some capacity to meet with people. And then you've got maintenance where you're heavily constrained in what you can centralize. And the sort of formula that seems to be emerging for centralizing maintenance looks really different from the others, right? You can't, you can do stuff like, like the Happy Force model, right? Where you get people to self-serve more stuff, which is probably a great experience for a lot of residents. And it also takes things like out of hours off the table, or largely off the table. It enables you it gives you more sort of flexibility, more options in terms of how you staff things. But generally, I was actually talking to Jindo the other week, and I was saying I don't think anybody in multifamily is trying to centralize maintenance with the objective of changing the 1-to-100 ratio. Like if I'm centralizing either admin or leasing, at the very least, one of the benefits I'm pursuing is to change the 1-to-100 staffing ratio, and probably in most cases it's the explicit objective of doing that exercise. I don't think anybody's centralizing maintenance. So that from that perspective, because at the end of the day, there is just too much of a limit to how many tasks you can take off property. Somebody always has to unblock the toilet, right?
That's right. That's right.
Until they come up with robots that can come do that, you are just going to have some high degree of presence there. And really, the money in centralizing maintenance for me seems much more to be about not wasting money with expensive resources when you can fix problems yourself. So it's much more about analyzing the work I have to do, getting better at triage and dispatch, sending the right resource to the right to the right fix the right problem, having more specialized resources within within a region of properties, and you make your money. It's like you make your money $500 at a time doing that, because as one person was saying in the research, if you employ an appliance specialist, since this one leader employed an appliance specialist, he had never seen another invoice for an external repair, and that's where you save the money there.
I remember reading that, and it's been interesting to me. I don't have any basis for this. It's just been sort of conceptual in my mind. If you're able to harvest some savings, let's call it headcount on the administrative side of the business, or in the office as we traditionally know it, if you were able to make things so efficient there that you could take something out of it, in my head, you try to reinvest that onto the service side of the business for all of the reasons that you just cited. And I would lump together with that, consumer sentiment, generally speaking. When you see those surveys, the biggest area of frustration for consumers is service requests and time, or like speed to finish, right? Or speed to solution. And if you were, I'm not suggesting you throw a head count at everything, but if you were to take those savings out of the office and put them over on the service side of the business, there might be a yield there, because you have more people working on that volume of problems that present themselves. And that volume of problems that present themselves always have all these sort of arbitrary things that can happen. You go over and you diagnose something, and then there's like three other things that you have to address as well. So anyway, getting off
Mhm.
track a little bit.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
you use, I thought this is an interesting way to think about this, or at least it sparked it in my head. Shared services is a term I generally see associated with a corporate environment, but as it relates to the administrative centralization, you use the word shared services. Can you kind of unpack that for us? Because I think you're definitely onto something there.
Well, yeah. So it's one of the things that's interesting with centralization. Like last year, one of the things, the conclusions that I drew last year was that centralization isn't quite the right word for the thing that people are doing. And if you think about admin, which again is the area where it's the most prevalent, the thing that people are doing is basically the same thing that most companies have done when they move stuff to shared services. So
Mhm.
whether it's centralized or not, if move in and move out admin is being handled by somebody sitting in a work from home environment, or sitting in an office, or is it centralized? Maybe, I don't know, but in most of the business world, we have a name for that, and we call it shared services, right?
Right.
That's the thing that we think of when we talk about back office. So yeah, I mean, I see that as basically what's happening here. It's interesting that the companies, if your business model permits you to do it, the model where you just create this facility, or you create this capability service by service, right? So let's do move in and move out processing, and let's do collections, and then you move these things off site, like bit by bit, into this environment where they can be done by specialists.
Mhm.
You then get to sort of evolve into a different staffing model. It's tough. If I look at it from an operator's perspective, it's really tough to say we're going to take this role off site. That's quite a big switch to flick, right? If you get that wrong, that's really bad, and there's a lot of change management in that. But if you start to, the examples I've heard where people sort of remove stuff piece by piece, figure out how to make the process work, then do the next piece. You then give people have progressively more and more time. Now, either that time gets, as you suggested, allocated to value adding stuff, delivering customer experience, or you find that you just don't need as many people, and that means that by attrition you just start to reduce the number of people you have working at a property. But yeah, if you're if you're like an operator or an owner operator that has the latitude to create some central resource that can start to soak up all of that all of that work, then you get to have a slightly more evolutionary path, which I think works better in a people industry like ours.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When I read through that and I saw that term, it instantly brought to mind that there are, in the corporate environment, you have data entry specialists
Mhm.
that work in the accounting department, call
Mhm.
them bookkeepers, whatever the term is. And you have, I don't want to say accountants because that's a bigger, more involved term, but
Mhm.
you've got people that do accounting oriented work, that if you think about a deposit reconciliation, for example,
Mhm.
that assistant manager used to do, that seems like a bit of an accounting type function, right? That can be done.
Mhm.
So it's absorbed into the shared service called accounting in the corporate environment. So you've already
Mhm.
got the infrastructure set up. You just need to hire the specialist, so to speak, that can do X amount of transactions, right? And a lot of that work was or is kind of accounting oriented in my mind.
Yeah, no, but you're right, and we talked about it last. I think we talked about it a bit last year. The technology that's available to do some of these processes. By the way, these processes that nobody likes, right? Who really enjoys deposit reconciliation
That's right.
and collections and that kind of stuff. But lots of this work. I mean, I think I used the example before of collections where taking that offsite and having this model where you've got leverage, right? Because you've got AI, you're figuring out who it needs to contact, and basically managing the conversation. You now need sort of somebody to kind of supervise and be the point of escalation, but you don't need somebody in every property to do that. So again, that works. Now that kind of technology is being used, it seems like it would work much better in a shared service environment rather than having this application running and 50 different assistant property managers having to somehow interact with it. That technology can be working from a central location where one or two people are overseeing what it does as a central function. So I think that's even more compelling than it was before.
Yeah, I agree. It just instantly made me think that, a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot of people, that's a general statement, but my imagination tells me that there are organizations out there that think about centralization and they think, wow, that is a tall task. I've got to put together an entirely new team, or I'm going to harvest team members off site and I got to create this whole structure. And that it might be that you just shift your mindset to the idea that you already have, at least as it relates to the administrative piece of the business, you already have the infrastructure in place. You've just got to bolt on some pieces to that infrastructure. In people who are pointy in their efforts, meaning they're experts, just bolt them on in that hierarchy, and you've got the first piece of your centralization. And to your point about just do one thing at a time, and it just becomes accretive over time once you get it all put in place.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Sounds like you have another one. Yeah.
I think you might be going where I was going to go. So go on.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I'm a good mind reader like that. I was gonna switch to the next topic, changing the tech stack. So if you had a different thought, I'd love to hear that before we change to the tech
All right.
stack.
It was, so the thing I was going to say was I think there's potentially a similar pattern that we will see with the adoption of AI, particularly like generative AI, which
Yeah.
to the extent people are thinking about it at all, which is not much, it's a small minority of companies that are kind of thinking about, all right, how do we get leverage out of something like OpenAI that is available for us to access through API and build our own pieces of functionality that use its large language model. The kind of problems people are thinking about are back office problems, right? And I think with AI, it's funny that first ever interview that we did for 20 for 20, you were talking about the implementation or at least the pilot that you had run for a digital leasing assistant at the time, and that was the end of 2018. So this is not new technology anymore in multifamily. Like things like your chat, digital leasing assistants, that kind of thing, have been around for 6 years, right? In our industry, so people are quite used to these tools. Most people use them, and anyone who's what everybody tells you when you ask them how they think about AI, any AI that interacts with customers is something that you buy in a prepackaged solution from a point solution provider. Nobody's thinking about, well, what could we do with a large language model that might directly serve our customer? Like nobody's thinking of that. They're thinking about the back office stuff. Well, I kind of think you might see quite a similar adoption pattern with this that you've seen with centralization, because again, the sort of marketing around centralization has all been about leasing, but when people start to do the work on it, they gravitate towards these high friction, relatively low value add tasks, of which there are many, right, in multifamily. And the problems that people actually end up solving are administrative ones, which is good. It's that seems like the right order in which to do things. Well, you could see a pattern over the next few years that just everybody ends up taking these jobs and putting them into sort of shared services, and from there, those are the things that people leverage, things like OpenAI
Mhm.
to try and streamline. So, okay, well, yeah, we've taken purchasing. Let's start doing procure to pay, right? Let's start doing more and more of the processing. Let's figure out how we can, we can replace some of the human, the really, again, the work nobody likes, the the sort of invoice
Right.
processing kind of work with or the sort of inquiry based work, for example, with some combination of chat using one of these large language models. So basically, the path that you go down is increasingly the admin tasks come off site. They get centralized from where they begin to get more and more automated. So the tasks go through this path into being just processed more and more by AI. I could definitely see that being a trend for the next few years.
It's that brought to mind something that I thought about. Who knows? It doesn't matter when I thought about it, but to your point of procurement, which is a little bit different than point of sale, in in the sort of the example that comes to mind there, which I think is what you're getting at. Let's pretend for a second we get there's an action like a notice to vacate, which by the way can be done by the consumer. Notice to vacate in a
Mhm,
property management system. That
mhm,
notice to vacate is triggers a workflow, and part of that workflow is a turnover, right, of an apartment. So there's a point of procurement in that you get a carpet vendor to come over and clean carpet if there is carpet in apartments anymore. Come over to clean the carpet, and there's a knock on from that, right? So once the work is done, there's validation of work done. Maybe it's a picture and a picture of the apartment number, and then it automatically produces an invoice, and it automatically produces a payment, and it automatically exchanges the good for the service, or the
mhm,
payment for the service.
mhm.
That in my head is what you just described there in a shared service environment. That shared service organization within your organization is going to create a workflow like that is completely automated by an artificial intelligence. Is that the right way to think about that?
Yeah, I think so. One the most sophisticated use case that I heard this year in these interviews was around that was actually around IT help desk. So the triage questioning that you do, takes, on average 15 minutes of conversation. Well, we can write a sort of custom, there's some custom scripts from our platform into OpenAI and replace that altogether. Like, so somebody can just enter the information, the AI can just chat to them, it can find out whatever information it needs to about the asset that is the subject of the call. And you've got to the point where you've got a perfectly populated work ticket, and no humans had to talk for 15 minutes to do it. So, it's things like that people seem to, and you could imagine, just think about what people end up having to call the accounts department about right now. Like, do you really need that person to be talking on the phone and having people play phone tag to resolve issues that you could probably figure out a way to get like chat to handle it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that is. Look, I think in the next 18 to 24 months, whether the vendors are offering the solutions and or people are brave enough to go out and create these workflows on their own, you can bolt them together. They're, a good weekend worth of education or like training yourself, you can do it. Um, let's shift gears because I think this changing tech stack is going to be a super interesting conversation. Not that centralization isn't interesting. It's just been sort of a mainstay for the last couple of years. But this next section, I was just, oh my goodness, it'll blow my mind a little bit. But so there are like five sections here. We talk about tech acquisition, connected community, short-term rentals, data and analytics, and AI adoption. So we can go in that order if that seems most appropriate.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's start with the on tech acquisition. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts
well,
there?
so the uh, in a year ago when people were looking forward towards 2023, one of because the property trading had slowed down, right? There were going to be fewer and fewer transactions because of the interest rate environment. People
Hmm.
knew that they were going to have to run properties for longer than perhaps they normally would, and run properties for positive income like returns, which is what most businesses do all the time. But in multi in real estate, you have industry. It's
Right.
the idea of a prolonged period where we have to figure out how to be profitable was something that sharpened people's attention like a year ago. And so people were talking about, well, 2023 is going to be a year when we look to spend less money on technology that we don't need. We eliminate overlap. Uh, we try and we're not going to have more vendors than we need to. Just this general idea of kind of economizing on technology. At the same time, so like at NAA this year, there were maybe four different companies spoke to me about products that they were bringing to market that do like procurement or sourcing, like stuff that's supposed to help people buy or manage buy stuff or manage vendors.
Mm.
And one of which is of course technology. And so because I knew there was a lot of activity on both sides of this equation, I just wanted to know if anything had really changed about the way that people evaluate or buy technology in 2023. Um, so the voiceover from the answers was fascinating, right? So the basically half of the people said no, nothing changed at all. You realize from the answers that it's like the wrong question to ask. That there were two sort of assumptions that turned out, I think, not to be correct. One is, I generally nobody is revisiting their tech stack to spend fewer dollars on technology. Like that's not the problem that people are trying to solve. It's much more the case that people are what people tell you. It's we're a we're a real estate industry, right? Which means not all of the technology in my stack is technology that I chose. Some technology just comes to us by way of, stuff that we acquired, or by way of partners that we're working with who have different preferences from ours. So, so eliminating overlap, it's much more like I'd like to get to a state where we have one vendor per category. That would be an objective that I would like to work to. So again, it's not that you're evaluating all this technology. It's kind of like you're rationalizing what you already have.
Mhm.
So there's a bit of a vendor bias in the question that I asked, because if you look at technology from a vendor's perspective, they see everything as a beauty contest, right? It's I'm going to pitch my product to Mike, and Mike's going to look at all the other products, and the product with the best combination of functionality and price wins, and they get Mike's business. That's just not very representative of how most technology gets bought. It's sometimes it happens, but it's the minority of cases. Most of the time, it's we've got all this technology, we want to get rid of stuff that we already have, that we don't need. Or, and this is where the most interesting stories were. You're talking to somebody, some operational leader, who's describing to you how they've bought a specific category of technology, and what they tell you is that I'm looking at this year. I'm trying to decide what things I can change about my business that I think will make me better equipped to deal with the opportunities that the market is going to throw at us. So you might be thinking about a problem like renewals. Well, if you think about your top of mind right now, given the conditions of just saturation of product in some markets, like you have to compete way harder for renewal business than you for all types of business, but like not losing renewals is a super big imperative. So if I'm trying to solve that
Mhm.
problem, that's a problem where there's lots of different levers I could pull, right? I could focus on maintenance, because it's probably the biggest causal factor in the renewals that you can influence. Or I could focus on pricing, like getting the price right. Or I could focus on the process of renewing people, and how I get people to approach, that whole process of getting, managing the conversation about risk. There's lots of different levers you could pull. You can't do everything, right? And so
Right.
you've kind of got to decide, all right, what is it that I think I'm going to do that's going to move the needle positively, and occasionally the thing that you decide to do sort of overlaps with some technology that you're aware of. And that's far more likely the process that you go through that leads you to think about buying a new technology. It's not like next week, let's get all the vendors of X in to pitch to us so we can choose the best one, which is the way that you would think of it from a vendor perspective. So yeah, you sort of realize it's sort of wrong question from the perspective that it's not really we're trying to just spend fewer dollars with companies. It's more it's more like we're trying to rationalize, we're trying to tidy stuff up, and in the case of buying new stuff, we're just sort of looking for which opportunities we can capitalize on that we think this technology might help us with.
Yeah, that was a fascinating thing you unpacked there, and I was thinking about that. There was some other narrative, I believe, is in that section as it relates to what's gonna, especially on the income side of the ledger, like what's going to give us ROI.
Hmm.
Obviously, on the cost side, we'd want to save or manage expenses better. But
Hmm.
talk to us about some of that rev side opportunity. Maybe I love what you said about managed Wi-Fi and bulk. Uh,
Well, yeah,
like
yeah. That's
so maybe start there and then talk about that as a rev
yeah.
gen
That's a
opportunity.
that's a hobby horse of mine because it's I've actually been doing some work with NMHC, which should hopefully come to fruition in the first half of this year. But we've been working on a managed Wi-Fi study, and one of the things that you notice is it's quite unhelpful that the industry uses terms like bulk and managed interchangeably. So yeah, I established a working definition of what we mean, what we meant when we were talking to people about this. But yeah, when we so that's really relevant to the revenue problem, right? So one of the things where people were talking about the technologies that they're going to consider this year, the top priority is anything that's going to pay back revenue, right? So there's a sort of rekindling of interest in revenue management, and for good reasons, not for the reasons that people have been talking about for the last year, but much more like how do you deal with things like things that revenue management hasn't dealt with very well historically. So how do you deal with concessions? Like how do you actually apply some smarts? How do you incorporate this more effectively into overall revenue management in an environment where rents are not all up and to the right in the way they have been for most of the recent past. So yeah, things that impact revenue, of which one is managed Wi-Fi, like because it's quite a substantial ancillary revenue stream that you're creating. So companies that had rolled out a successful managed Wi-Fi program were looking in 2024 to do as much more of it as they possibly could, like wherever current contractual arrangements permitted them to. They wanted to roll out managed Wi-Fi because it throws money into the pot at the end of the day. In thinking about revenue, we sort of asked about managed Wi-Fi in the context of just generally like connected communities. When we were talking just over the last few years, when you talk to people about connected communities, it's gone from being a conversation that's predominantly about smart tech to a conversation that now feels like it's predominantly about managed Wi-Fi. Or bulk Wi-Fi, but yeah, basically your decision about what kind of Wi-Fi you're going to deliver to your residents, and yeah, so although people are continuing to roll out smart technology, you don't have it's not the same sort of enterprise technology proposition that it was 5 years ago, for example, when the big sort of early adopters were all buying IoT technology.
That's right. Staying in the theme, or sticking with the theme of RevGen, STRs or short-term rentals was another topic. If you want to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, so it's active now. So it's And it feels like it's for real this time. Like I remember, I don't know if you do, but around 2019, maybe 2019, 2020. It's one of the early editions of this paper. We talked to people a lot about short-term rentals. We'd actually been doing a lot of analysis on the market, and so we're curious to know about the sort of uptake on it. And the thing at the time was just there were dozens of short-term rental companies that were getting funded, all kinds of business models. Some of them made practically no sense when they when the companies would explain them to you. But you had lots and lots of VCs throwing lots of money at short-term rentals. What made me suspicious of them at that time, back in the sort of 2019, the sort of pre-pandemic period, was that nobody I interviewed for this paper saw short-term rentals as a priority. Like it seemed to me to be 100% the case that operators saw short-term rentals, and since nobody had an occupancy problem, the interest in short-term rentals was very, very sort of peripheral. Then the pandemic happened, and that cleared out most of the companies that were engaged in the space. It also just the combination of, I think in that pre-pandemic period, lots of people sort of dipped their toes in the water, and it didn't go well. Then there was the pandemic, and so generally there were sort of PR headwinds around the short-term rental industry as a whole. But really, in the last probably 18 months, it really feels like it's sort of come back, and now it's clearly relevant. Like there are big companies who are taking it much more seriously than they did at the first go around. The companies providing the technology and the channels to market look, and I think I can't remember what it was, like a quarter or something of the companies that we interviewed were actively doing short-term rentals, and I've never seen that before, right? But every time you would ask before, nobody was really putting any. Other than a few edge cases, nobody was really reporting that this was an important thing to them, and now it is.
And there's sort of two flavors of short-term rentals. One is that you do have these companies that just manage the end-to-end experience, and you're sort of making a little bit of an arbitrage, I think, or a little bit of rev share off of that let's call it a managed service, versus like doing it in-house yourself, right? That's the second variation of it.
Well, yeah. So I think there are two major types of short-term rental, and one of them is the two things that you just described. So it's basically either what you call short-term rentals as an amenity. So it's like the Airbnb friendly apartment model.
Yep.
In fact, that's the dominant like provider there now, and the problem you're solving there is that when I'm not in my apartment, I might want to sublet it through Airbnb. So the value prop for that is you potentially make rent way more affordable, right? So in markets like New York, we're still seeing like massive rent increases. There's no sign of apartments getting more affordable in New York anytime soon. So
Sure.
one solution, if I'm a renter who's trying to afford an apartment, is, well, if I put somebody in my apartment for like, I don't know, 20-ish days a year, that's going to create enough revenue to subsidize my rent to a point where I can afford this apartment, right? So that's the and from the operator's perspective, sorry, New York, you're not allowed to do that, are you? But anyway, some city that's got New York's characteristics, where that has a less aggressive hotel industry.
Yeah.
But yeah, but yeah, in markets that where it makes renting more affordable, it also gives to the operator, like the person who's running the building, it gives them visibility over who's coming in and out of their building. So it's this quite nice sort of win-win, and they get a little cut of the rental revenue. So it's a nice way to get control of an activity that will probably go on anyway, and it's a value add to the resident, which also makes your apartment more attractive, because people people who are interested in that model are likely to be searching for apartments that support that amenity, right? So yeah, that's one type of stuff. And by the way, Airbnb described that in the article that they contributed to this year's paper as well. If you want any more details on that. But the other side is what you call the lease arbitrage model, right? Where it's instead of doing just having 12-month leases, you're going to put other types of rental into the building. So you might you might have something that looks a bit more like corporate housing, or something that looks a bit more like hotel, or what I think is more the case now. You're looking at sort of complete flexibility to put whatever duration of renter, a furnished renter into a vacant unit that you can. And I think those models where the two things that you described, the one where you're going to furnish the apartment and run it yourself and just use somebody's software to help you manage the different lease durations, or you've got a turnkey thing where somebody else comes in and runs it for you, right? Those are the models. But like the gist of that model is that I'm going to put different kinds of rentals into my property. Sometimes that's a more lucrative use of some of my units, and sometimes it helps me with a problem, like in a market where absorption of 12-month leases is slow.
I think it's important to say to listeners or viewers that please make sure you check with your local municipalities before you put anything like this in place, and definitely run it up the chain if you're working on site and listening to this. It's rife with complications. So every municipality is different. Okay, switching gears, data and analytics. This has been I remember, gee whiz, let's say it was 10 years ago, and I just said gee whiz. That's really wild. 10 years ago, plus minus, maybe, I remember sitting in a session at one of the conferences, and there was a gentleman on stage talking about business intelligence, and he had put a platform in place, and he was literally measuring like 325 metrics. And back then it was like, wow, that is really mind blowing. But it's come a long way since that moment in time. And in 10 years is speculation on my part, but talk to us about data and analytics.
Yeah, well, we've been sort of tracking BI for the last few years, and that's a market that's clearly been maturing. Like more and more companies have, you've always had this thing in multifamily where people adopt BI in quite an odd way. They'll go as long as they can without it, then they'll go with the PMS vendor version. They always outgrow that, and then they develop their own thing, which takes multiple years. So it's this very sort of uneconomical kind of process that people go through to get to what you might call best of breed, like BI capabilities. But people have been making that transition, and in fact, we reported pretty extensively last year on the sort of specific use cases that people had had been able to implement because their data was in a good enough state with good enough analytical tools that they could do it. So that's been an area that's been maturing for years, and it was essentially more of the same this year. What does seem interesting is that revenue management seems to be kind of in play at the moment. Revenue management has been incredibly settled for a long time. I think one of the first, maybe the first ever edition of 20 for 20, the thing that sort of shocked us was how distant the people we speak to are always heads of technology, heads of operations, and we were surprised at how distant that those leaders were from revenue management. In most industries where people are doing revenue management, airlines, hotels, whatever, right up to the top of the organization, people are sort of aware of what big things are, or what's changing with regard to revenue management. It's something that's and so we kind of stopped asking about it after a while, just because there was never anything interesting came out of those conversations. But this year, more than a quarter of the people were planning to change their revenue management solutions. That's definitely very atypical of the last, gosh, 10 years or something in the industry. That's been very very settled, but lots of people looking to change. More, I think, would be changing, but people are just hesitant about doing anything. Some people, not most people, but some people seem hesitant about doing stuff in an environment where you still have these lawsuits hanging around. So I suspect that will be moving quicker still, were it not for that. And yeah, I don't know. It's a sort of combination of new technologies becoming available, and the fact that people are preoccupied with stuff that's to do with revenue, like how do we compete in an environment where achieving revenue growth is way harder than it has been for a long time. That seems to be causing people to it's created an appetite for revenue management innovation.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's not just from the revenue management perspective, but um, we had, right before I left my prior company, we'd put a BI tool in place in the insights that you could glean out of that, the customization and the insights that you could glean out of a good BI model after you wash the data, after you structure the data. There's lots of work you have to do on the front side. Otherwise, it's messy data and it's not good to use for making decisions. But once you get it there, um, the insights you can glean out of a system like that are well worth the investment that you would put into it. There's just so much data in your organization that is locked up, and there are
Mhm.
so many opportunities to commingle different information. So out of the PMS system, out of all those kind of best of breed platforms that you're using for resident sentiment or team member sentiment and other things, you can bring that all into one place and commingle it and draw some pretty interesting insights out of it. So I'm a big
Yeah, well, I mean,
advocate.
the last paper that I released before this one was a paper about business intelligence. And you're right. It's I mean, one of the things that's really cool about there's this challenge if you're trying to tell people about business intelligence. If you haven't used really good business intelligence, it's hard to it's hard to explain what you're missing. So
Mhm.
basically, wrote this white paper about companies that had made this switch. And the thing is, if you get them to describe things that they can do differently that they couldn't do before, it's very very easy for people to say, all right, well, we used to do this thing and now we do this thing, and here's what the benefit is, right? And basically, researching that paper, there were so many like really good examples of like really specific things, how like a company had improved its leasing velocity because they were able to configure like specific metrics that revenue management and maintenance would use so that they could collaborate together on this problem. Like, because the problem with leasing velocity is you can manipulate the demand side by changing price, but you don't get more leasing velocity unless you've got more apartments ready to lease, right? So it's actually about making the analytics and the operation work in lockstep. But there's just tons of examples like that. And so we did this research, spoke to maybe 7 or 8 companies that had done this, and reviewing all of these use cases, the common thread between all of them was that the lever that it was enabling people to pull was collaboration. That was the thing that where the financial benefits lie. It's in making these two companies, or making these two the center and the property work more effectively together, or two different departments, or a fee manager and an owner, or finance and the rest of the organization. Every source of value that people succeeded in unlocking was a collaboration that they weren't able to do until their data supported it. And I've had tons and tons of feedback on that. People saying, yes, that's exactly what happens when you go from average to like really, really good BI. And
Yeah, I agree. I think when you're to that point, when you're sitting down, while all the work is going on to clean up your data on the front side and putting it into the BI system, um, put a workflow in place in your organization, be it a, like a senior team that has every perspective in your organization sitting at the table. So you have the voice of the consumer, you have the voice of the team member, you have the voice of even the accounting department, and in the way that people look at data is super interesting from their perspectives. But to your point about collaboration, when you have all those people in the same room and you're looking at that data, you can see the correlations, you can understand the different perspectives, and you can really kind of, based on sort of a mind share, come up with really, really good solutions based on that
Mhm,
data.
mhm, mhm.
It's well worth the investment. We're coming up on an hour. I want to sort of maybe end cap with the big crescendo punchline for 2024. So I'm moving into the conclusions that you came up with, and you say that something trumps everything in 2024. And I'm just curious. I'll let you have the punchline. What is trumping
Yeah,
everything in 2024?
I mean, it's really revenue. It's the thing that people are more concerned about than anything else. So, like everyone's been, as we said before, everyone's been much more focused on just operating like NOI, and you've got these escalating costs. Uh, like I said, you can't sort of you can't trade away like problems with performance. So people have been focused for a while on the operating margin. But the thing that people are preoccupied this year is more the top line than the bottom line. And the reason for that is that there are just so many markets in the US that are absolutely awash with new supply. It's quite strange actually, because if you look at the Sun Belt, the economic fundamentals are great, right? The by
That's right.
any measure, like this looks like a strong economic growth story. But when Austin has, I think the new apartments arriving in 2024 are like 25% of all of the apartment stock in the market. You're
That's
not
right.
going to absorb that in a year. Those are extremely challenging circumstances. So you've got, in markets like these, you've got very mobile renters, right? It's they're going to move house a lot more than they do elsewhere in the country. It's just easy to imagine if you're running you've been running a property there for a while, and you've got residents who are coming up for renewal who are being offered brand new products, probably for the same price or less than what they're currently paying. It's hand to hand combat, right? In those markets. So how do I squeeze every last drop of business out of every lead that I get? How do I make people want to stay with me and not move out? How do I make how do I generate revenue if I'm not going to get it from rents? Like those are problems that people are really thinking about a lot this year.
hmm and yes, I validated that. That is absolutely true. I I'm curious, is there anything that we haven't talked about today that came out of your research that we should do a definite end cap with, before I give you an opportunity to tell people where they can find the paper and reach out to you if they would like to do so?
Well, there's that point on innovation. We say, good enough it made a bit of a comeback in
Yes.
20, in 2023. So you just heard a lot that there are platform vendors who have made a variety of really aggressive moves to either acquire competing technology or raise the level of their competing products to the point where it's more competitive with the best of breed software that's out there in the market. I find that interesting because it's just when you read what people are saying about, well, I still think the best of breed solution is way better. But if we were making that decision today rather than 2 or 3 years ago, it would be a tougher decision to make, right? These vendors are giving us something different to think about now, which is very different story 2 or 3 years ago when there were various like big defections from the big platforms to best of breed vendors, the
That's
story
right.
was very much these platform vendors can't move fast enough to move things at the speed that we need them to. So we need best of breed vendors to do this work for us. You just sort of strategically you get the sense of this pendulum that sort of swings, right. It swung very decisively in the direction of no, we need best of breed people to solve this set of problems, back to the platform, these very, very large companies saying like, all right, well, we've sort of figured out how we're going to compete with this, and it sort of drags the pendulum back in the opposite direction. And it's funny. Like if I thought about it more, that might explain much of why our technology environment is the way that it is. Right? It's best of breed has this disproportionate role in driving innovation, but it is nevertheless the case that most functionality, most technology like being used in multifamily comes from either Yardi, RealPage, or AppFolio. Like it just
That's
does.
right.
That's a fact. So you sort of see these multi-year competitive dynamics play out, but I just feel like 2023, just particularly, it was probably just people being a bit more parsimonious with their spend and not wanting to grow support organizations and stuff. It just felt like it was maybe slightly advantage to the big players in 2023, which I felt was quite a big strategic thing.
I do feel it right for me to say because I've given a fair amount of criticism to the big property management systems over the years on this platform. And I sat in a meeting recently with one of them, and I was just shocked and awed at the advancements that they had made
Mm,
over, let's say it was over the last 24 months, to all the points that you just made. And I think you even made that point in this report. They really have picked up their, I don't know that they've picked it up or they're just now revealing it to the world that they've been working on all of these things and advancing them in a way that they they look very, very useful.
mm,
And to your
mm,
point about being good enough, they're good enough. They might even be equal in some
mm,
cases,
mhm, mhm.
in this guy's opinion. So, anyway,
Mm.
Dom, it is an absolute pleasure to always invest some time with you. I thank you for investing that time with us. And is where can people find this report? We'll link that up in the show notes. And if they want to reach out to you directly, where can they do that?
Yeah, so 20for20.com, 20for20.com. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, just Dom Beverage. You can find me pretty easily. I blog quite frequently, so if I'm usually working on something that's so if you ever want to stay up to date with what I'm doing, just subscribe to my blog, which you'll find on the website.
Excellent, Dom. We'll link it up. Just a short acknowledgement of the work that you do. You're just a tremendous asset to the multifamily space. I look forward to everything that you write. I download it immediately and fit it into my reading routine as quickly as I possibly can. But I just want to thank you from my heart of hearts for the time and the investment you put into creating this stuff. This is really, really good.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having created a new medium through which more content can get out to more eyeballs and more ears.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We're in the early innings, but we're going for it. So, for everyone else, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Collective Conversations. Take care.